Um, Dan came all the way out from Atlanta. He was on his way to LA. Took a day to come here and visit us. And I got, just as a way of introduction, I was really excited. We met through a mutual friend, Martin. Martin Stanford's, who you worked with at Sodexo.
Right.
And you can give more background on that. But Dan and I had a comment. Martin said, "You got to meet this guy, Dan. He's, lived and breathed this notion of how do we think about knowledge within large organizations." He used the term knowledge harvesting, which immediately brought to mind like organ harvesting, and I was like, "How does knowledge? Do you like read someone's brain? How does that work?" And it immediately fascinated me. I'm gonna turn off my phone here. So this is off. Immediately fascinated me, so we got on the phone and just started talking, and there was a lot of parallels, and it's just an area that I feel like I'm learning so much about, has been written about for decades in terms of just frameworks for how large organizations are thinking about one of their most important and strategic assets, which is knowledge. But as we talked about over lunch, sometimes it's very hard to identify and articulate. So really happy to have you here with us. Dan, thanks for coming all the way out
Thanks for having me.
and routing it, and want to make this both a conversation and also give you the opportunity to share some of the frameworks that I know you've spent decades plus on. So thank you again for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So maybe you could just start. One, this is the team. I know we went through and said hi, and everyone. Hopefully, you get a chance to meet afterwards. There'll be a little bit of time for you after rush to the airport. Could you maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and a little bit of background? We got into some family
Great.
stories
Yeah.
too today, so yeah.
Yeah. I'll start off who I am. So I'm probably most importantly, I'm a father of 4 children, 2 girls, 2 boys in that order, ranging in age from 31 to 20. Probably my biggest life accomplishment so far. Knock on wood. But how I got to where I am in terms of understanding knowledge and knowledge management was really started probably when I was at the University of Kentucky, and I had my degree my bachelor's is in accounting with a minor in computer science, which I know you're probably right now thinking, how does a guy in accounting and computer science end up here in this realm? It really had a lot to do with my belief that there was a convergence between business and information, and I wanted to be in the middle of it, and I planned my career on that. And my career started off traditional accounting into the major firms, so I was with Arthur Andersen, worked there and for 5 years, and in the course of that, I realized that probably 2 things would happen. I would end up watching the price of real estate in Chicago outpace my salary, and second of all, that I would probably spend less and less time with my family. And it was around the birth of Evan, our third child, my first son, that we made the decision that we were going to make a move out of public accounting. And as it turned out, I got a job with a company called Georgia Pacific in Atlanta, and I'm still in the auditing world. And along came SAP, and I was involved with the SAP project at the company, and watched that, and really got to know people in the IT department at the company, and really decided that my whole goal was to go to the company, start an internal audit, and then leave there into somewhere in the company. So I found myself supporting as an IT lead analyst with the company, the finance, risk management, and environmental teams, and as well as the legal department. And my whole role was to understand how they could optimize technology better. It started kind of a pattern where I defined roles that I had where really I got to define it. And the one thing I learned is I love being able to define what I do and not have it be defined for me. And it took a period of time, probably 7 months, but when I went into my boss, and who continues to remain my mentor, and I said, I'm looking at all these departments, and my job is to help them optimize technology. And one of the things that I learned is, I said, all of these groups make their value and provide their value to the company off of what they know and making decisions. And I proposed, I said, I really think we need to look into this thing called knowledge management, because it was at that time that knowledge management started becoming more of a buzzword. People were talking about it. And he said to me, I think it's really interesting that you're bringing that up, because I just met a guy. And he talked to me about this concept called knowledge harvesting. He says, maybe we need to bring him in and talk to him. So we brought him in, and he spent about an hour presenting to us, talking about knowledge harvesting. And then he said, he said, I'd like to invite one or both of you to come to Birmingham, Alabama, and spend 3 days learning about knowledge harvesting. And he says that if you like it, then we can talk about what else we can do. And it was my boss looked at me, Rob looked at me, and he said, well, what do you think? I said, I think he's full of crap. And I was definitely a doubting Thomas. I said, but what the heck, you want to send me there for 3 days, I'll go there for 3 days. And so I went there for 3 days, and it literally changed my perspective. It was during that time that I learned about how to capture know-how, and that there was this process that you go through to capture this know-how, and came back truly enlightened that there was more to this, and that it was really a approach to understanding expertise within a company that we needed to leverage. And that really started my journey. And through that time, it has taken me to using knowledge harvesting as a basis to understand the constructs that a company needs to use and understand to engage in knowledge management and actually bring about its value. And so I got to build kind of the first iteration of the framework at Georgia Pacific, and shortly after it's was acquired by the Coke Industries, not Coca-Cola, KOCH. I left. I left there to go to work for a check free, and I had an opportunity there to once again take what I knew. And my role was again implement a knowledge management program. So I took everything I learned and I put it together at check free, and I built there, and I spent 3 years doing just that. Again, found myself in a situation. The company was acquired by Fiserv, and shortly after that, there was kind of a competing philosophical differences that led to my team being, and the financial downturn really led to my team being disbanded. And so I left there to go work for Lowe's. And so I implemented it at Fiserv, it's still running there. Implemented it at Georgia Pacific, now I get to go to a retail operation. By then, a lot of what you see today really was what I would say is the mature framework. This is what I think are the building blocks and components to being that you need to do to kind of look at knowledge management and know what you need to do given the business need that you see there. So there's components that go into it. It's not like you do everything. It's like, here's what the framework, so that you know what to do and what you need to apply. And at Lowe's, one of the projects that we were doing was we were basically understanding knowledge there, and our biggest portion of that project is insourcing all of their appliance repair business. It had been outsourced, so they had zero knowledge on that. So how do they, and the goal is, you don't wanna send a truck out. And so, one of the things that we.
I imagine that costs a lot of money
Oh,
versus
yeah,
when the
it's
customer calls and
Yeah.
when I get that 2-year warranty on my washer and I'm like, just send the truck out.
Right. So their goal is if they can get the customer to fix it themselves, it'll save them money, and more importantly, the customer gets their appliance back up and running sooner rather than later. The difference of hours versus days was critical to them. And so that was, at that point, it was a little bit easier for me to say, okay, I know you need to do this, you need to do A, B, C, to get things going. And again, some refinements came out of that, but for the most part, it was more a matter of proving, can this not only work in a manufacturing setting, in a financial services sector, but it's now proving to be able to be equally as effective in a retail setting.
Yep.
And as I was a consultant,
Yeah.
that project, at that point in time, that project completed, and the opportunity where I'm at now at Sodexo came about, which was to take the North American sector of the business and to implement knowledge management in that arena. So that's where I'm at now.
Awesome. And just because I know you'll harken back to some of them when we go through your slides, but when you think about the impact at some of the places that you've made, one question we constantly ask is, what's the ROI? What's the business value around that? But I know you were telling me like the story about Georgia Pacific and David there. I thought that was a good example, the Lowe's example. But maybe you could give us a couple kind of stories. We love storytelling here. A couple stories of coming into an organization. What occurred? What did you find out, and what was the impact of that?
Yeah. So I'll tell you right away, when I went to the training for knowledge harvesting, I came back and obviously I went from very skeptical to a true believer.
Changed man.
Yeah, a changed man. And what was really interesting is that it was less than a week that somebody came to Rob, my boss, and said, we're losing this individual. And this particular individual had melanoma, had come out of remission, and he was the only person that handled bad debt and collection, made the critical decisions for the company. And the VP of credit was saying, what do we do? How are we going to do this? And Rob suggested that we try knowledge harvesting to capture his knowledge. And so I went from this training into actually testing it out for the first time. And we spent within a period of 3 weeks harvesting this individual's knowledge. The one thing that we knew was that we didn't know if he was ever coming back. There's so little certainty about the situation. We were lucky because of that. We had an individual who wanted to share his information and knowledge at a very high level. He viewed it as his legacy. And so we spent this time capturing this knowledge, and our first tool that we deployed it on was RoboHelp, because that was a tool that somebody said, hey, I think I can do it on this. And we deployed it on RoboHelp, and we tied it to the credit management system, which was one of the things which was critical, is to make sure that whenever you're deploying the knowledge asset, that is close to the individual, the target learner, as possible to the activities they're presenting. So it was shortly after that. So we started that project in early July. We went live in mid-August. At the end of August, there was a new credit manager, and he went into the VP of credit said, I have this account that I'm concerned about. When do I know when to shut off their credit? And the VP of credit said, hey, why don't you try this new tool? And showed him the tool, and he started going through the decisions of the tool and looking at different criteria, and it was walking him through the decisioning of the individual. And it got to the point finally where it said, stop all shipments. and not only did it say stop all shipments, but it told him all the places, all the individuals to contact, all the steps to follow, all the forms that he needed to fill out. And he completed that day. 2 days later, the company that in question went bankrupt.
Wow. How much did that save?
Well, it was $2 million worth of shipments being ready to be shipped out that were stopped on the loading dock. So we went from almost to an immediate success.
Yeah.
And it was during this time that I really started to, in addition to that, started to evaluate what are the other components. So I started learning about communities of practice. I started learning about expertise management. A lot of people called them the corporate yellow pages back then, and starting to draft what you see in my knowledge management 1, which is the harvest to sow to grow vision for knowledge management. And in addition to that, like I suggested to you earlier, I read Harvard's HBR's business compendium on knowledge management. So I studied Peter Senge, Nanaka, and really helped that to frame out what I, going from theory to actually practical. What was the practical nature of it? And started proposing and building, some of those pieces within Georgia Pacific. It was during this time that the company really started to embrace some of them, which is communities. And they did what they called were excellent
Centers of excellence.
well, not necessarily centers of excellence, but they were more what they call like manufacturing excellence, which was a community practice, sales excellence. So their excellence communities is really what they were. And I got engaged with the manufacturing excellence. And during this time, my VP at the time, vice president at the time, was talking with the head of manufacturing for pulp and paper. They said, we think we have an opportunity to do something.
Because Georgia Pacific focuses on paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as it's organized, there's pulp and paper, which is kind of you take the wood and you make pulp, which is made in other products, and paper, which is more of a raw paper. It's the big rolls, and then you have commercial, and then you have consumer products, which is your Brawny, your Great Northern, Kirkland. And then you have packaging, and then by then they'd already just divested all their forest land, and they divested all their distribution division. So they still had wood products, plywood, etc. But this was in the pulp and paper side. They thought they had an opportunity. So I hopped on a plane to Savannah, Georgia, and spent the time with the general manager there. And it's during that time that he started talking about the pains they had on vibration analysis. So paper machines are fairly complex. Like one paper machine can run as high as $1 billion to build. So this is a general manager running a very small Fortune, at the time, 500 company, which is a Savannah paper mill. And to bring a paper mill down for maintenance is about $1 million a day.
Wow.
So if you and the goal is that paper runs through rollers, and the rollers are rubber, and they literally run the paper machines until they run the rubber off the rollers. They would really like to run it because when the rubber rolls off, you tear the paper, which does bad damage to the machine. So they want to run it as close as they can as possible. So preventive maintenance and what they call vibration analysis, is critical to understanding when you need to bring that down, and if you can preferably schedule the downtime. So they bring the whole mill down at a certain time, do preventive maintenance on that. And his concern was he had a lot of individuals who were young, who, even though they went through the training, often were making decisions that he questioned, that he didn't believe he was needed to bring the machines down.
It could cost millions of dollars.
Yeah, millions of dollars. And so he suggested that we spend time with an individual called David Felker. David was over 20 years with the business, and the key word that we heard was, when David tells me I need to bring the machine down, I know I need to bring the machine down. And so we set about spending time with David Felker, and he's one of those true individuals that you run across that has this rich knowledge that can only be that nobody else has. Like David would run up to a machine and put his hand on a machine and says, "Oh, that machine's running rough. That roller over there, that's going to go in 45 days." And he knew that. He could.
He's like a machine whisperer.
Well, he was. And in many ways, he was a machine whisperer. And the interesting thing is that one of the first thing we did is he handed us this manual. It was about that thick, and said, "Well, this is the manual that tells you how to read the results you get from the vibration and analysis machine." And I literally read it.
Wow.
I don't know why, but I read it, and part of the things you do is you mine and you try and understand the knowledge that's there. Well, one thing we discovered was, the first thing he said to me, I only look at about 20% of that. And he says, everybody else follows this exactly how it is. He says, but that machine, he points to the machine out in there, he says, that machine, that runs totally different than the machine on the other side of the plant. This particular plant ran 2 paper machines at that time. He says, and that, he pointed on a diagram, he says, that roller there, that roller runs rough. He says, if I do take a vibration reading of that, it'll tell me I need to bring the machine down. He says, if it's brand new, it'll tell me I need to bring the machine down. He says, but I'm watching, and he showed us spikes that happened, and he says, I watched that. He says, and when it gets to this point, it has a reading of 3, and I think one according to the handbook says you need to bring the machine down, but it runs at about 2.5 is about the range. He said when it gets to 3, he says, I have 30 days. Yeah. And he says, so I watched that. So we started capturing a lot of what he was saying. What does it mean when you watch it? Yeah. What does it mean? And one of the things we also understand is that each machine had its own aspect of knowledge, so we needed to know the machine too. And we started to separate between what is core knowledge. So any machine that you go to will have will use the same level of information, or the same knowledge to make your decisions off of. And then what was unique to the machine. So that allowed us to be able to transfer that to the next mill and then say, okay, what's the machine? We only had to look at the machine knowledge. Yeah. The great thing about the whole thing is at the end, we packaged it together, so we took their application that was taking the vibration readings, and we mirrored it right up against using a portal technology to put them side by side. So as you were going through seeing your readings, it would pull up comparative vibrations so that you can determine what point it was at.
So David had been turned into this more interactive process.
Right. So we flew David up and to present. Yeah. And so he's presenting to the president of Pulp and Paper. So and he's just the most humble guy to begin with. One of the things he kept saying is I don't know. He goes, who would find this useful? Yeah. He kept saying that over and over. He goes, I don't know why you guys. Is this a waste of your time? And he finally started presenting it, and he started, and during one section, and he stopped, and he just kind of tweaked his head and said, He says, I forgot that I did that. He goes, I'm realizing that I would use this tool. Of which the president said, okay, how much is this going to cost me? So we went from pilot to actually production, and it saved, just at the Savannah River Mill. And we estimate that it saved 4 to 5 unplanned downtimes, which is $4 or $5 million for a tool that cost probably $350,000 to build.
Wow, that's great.
So,
Well, I love those stories. I mean, I know it also talks a little bit about how you take the tacit and make it a bit more explicit
Right.
and turn it into some of those assets, which we'll talk about. I was going to go into some of the slides in just a sec, but wanted to maybe give 5 minutes for questions, then come back to more questions,
Sure.
if that's okay. Anything that of what we just talked about, where there are questions in people's minds before we jump into some of the frameworks that that Dan has used in his work?
Well, I guess on that one, what you're just saying about, and you put it into the product. So, was the product always a software product? Was it a combination of software and services? So, how did you determine how to distill the information into something that then could be executed within the product? So, for some of them, it makes sense because I've done the comparative maintenance analysis for GE kind of things, where you find the locomotive doctor, literally,
Right.
who could just like listen to it and go like, it's transmission 4 on blah blah. I'm like, you're doing your design research thing, you write it down, you figure out, it's like, all right, how is he doing that, and then they'll walk you through it. But so how do you make the translation step between you have the knowledge or what the data is? So with the vibration machine, I think that's relatively straightforward. You're trying to do comparables of here's really a more accurate version of what steady state or safe state is, and then say and try to show how that works. But for some of the others, what kind of choices, and the risk management sounded like one where you had kind of a decision tree and you're able to translate that into a product. So what are the steps you took, and was it always a pure software implementation? Was it sometimes a mix of software and hardware and services? So how do you take the knowledge and then determine then when you're trying to then go into that productization process? And also then how are you doing the calculations of it's great when you can have the downtime calculated for the ROI, and then you're saying like, did you reverse calculate, so like was the other ROI calculation, like when you're doing that, was it the number that you were charging, or what was the cost versus the number you're charging versus the ROI? And that kind of math to figure out where we should be trying to put our very limited resources.
Right.
About what is that prioritization process, and what are the key components of that probably between the ROI side and the pricing side and the productization side.
Okay. Well, I'm
There's
assuming
a lot
that's
in there.
one question.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just kept going. I'm like, then it's kind of gets more complex.
One thing I heard was it always software?
Yes, that's.
And the answer is one of the things that you will talk about when we hit the knowledge harvesting slides is you think about packaging, and packaging has to do with what is the best place for me to deploy this knowledge, and and my goal is I want to deploy it as close as I possibly can to where the actual activity is taking place, so that the target learner is right there, and when they're doing it, they're learning while doing, which creates an action learning environment. So I'm thinking about that almost right away when I'm having once I know what I'm going to do, start thinking about how best to deploy it. In the particular one with the credit department, we put it right as the help within the credit application. We just hijacked the help. It became the help. Within the David situation, we actually used a portal, and we had the vibration analysis tool running on one window in the portal. We had the knowledge being run simultaneously, and in that particular case, you're facilitating decision making on your analysis, and then below that, we actually added all the support. We basically digitized the manual and had that available. But what we did have in the manual was only the useful things that David said we needed.
That's the other 1,000 pages.
So if we referenced it, you could be in there and says, as stated in this, it may be, there were points where he did go to the manual. So we just had that there, so you can go to it. So we were only supporting what was deemed to be the best practice there for him. and that. And in another case, I had a trifold. I looked at it and I'm saying, you know what, the best place to do this is a trifold, and everybody says, you're not gonna do this on technology? I said, is that a better way to do it than this trifold? Because the person using it all the time would walk around or use it, and it was so easy for them just to open it up and do it, and it made sense. And when I was thinking about it, I challenged myself over and over, why am I not doing this in a tool? And I said, well, actually, this is the tool. It's the best tool.
Paper's technology too. Trifold.
On the ROI front, like, knowing that you could save $4 or $5 million for that one particular plant, was that something that you could make an argument for a lot more research? I know you were internal to them, right? So it's different than maybe us as a vendor, but something we think about, like, how do we price this based on what the impact could be, and we're still kind of discovering that.
Yeah.
Just have you kind of gotten the sense of price sensitivity, how people think about pricing? I mean, we talked about knowledge management being somewhat nebulous on some hand and fuzzy on one hand. On the other hand, those RI numbers you talked about were not fuzzy. Those were some real numbers. Right?
And you think I will acknowledge we didn't start off thinking ROI with David. We talked about consistency in the process. We thought about better decision making and trustworthy of those decision making, so that the general manager knew what it had. We also were building it because we knew David wouldn't be around forever. And but at that time we were piloting. We honestly weren't worried as much about cost. But once we had a tool, we realized that there was ROI, and so we went into that room with an estimated ROI. So how we did that was honestly, when you put the numbers down on paper, they were so large that I reduced them to 25% what the estimate was.
Wow.
And that was, and I showed what the full numbers were, and I put it 25%. I said this number's based upon risk of implementation. I said that if there is a reason why we don't achieve this number, I said I am absolutely sure we will achieve this number, and it was still worthwhile to do. It was clear. And I'll share it with you. I have to dig it up, but I do have calculated out ROI for if you're doing communities of practice, which I think is around 4 to 1. But I think we estimate for every dollar that you spend doing the deep dive knowledge harvesting, it's 16 to 25 to 1.
Wow. That's
so for every dollar that they spend. The one thing is that work that I did with David and the credit manager, those are typically ones that you consult because you're going in and you're actually sitting down in a deep dive exercise with them. Other aspects of it, what I realize is that's not the norm. That's the thing that we do. Everything else we do leads to those moments, because those moments are going to justify everything else that we do. But things like communities of practice are key because it prepares us to understand who do we need to talk to, who do we need to do the deep dive harvesting. The other thing is creating corporate Yeller pages, knowing who knows what about what. I need to know who to go to. Who can I ask a question for? That has value in and of itself. It's probably one of the easiest things to do. I think storylines is well on that. It's because you're in either way. If I'm creating my own personal page trying to tell you who I am, I'm telling you my story. And the goal with those situations is being able to make sure that at the end of the day, everything that we're doing, I think we need to be having searchable and usable information that I can actually drive at. So I'm interested in the skills that you have and the abilities. I'm interested in your work product, and then how does that classify? So I want to know who knows vibration analysis in pulp and paper, in this type of, and through air drying, which is a type of machine. And what are the names that come up there? So that, and then that way I can post a question to them.